Well, I wasn't one of the original founder members, but I knew that something was happening in the Jewish world because I just heard things. I worked in housing, and someone had mentioned to me that there was now a Jewish Women's Aid refuge. And I was very interested, and I was with a friend who told me about it. And then I got a telephone call from Judith Usiskin, who had been my club manager when I was a teenager. And here I was coming up to retirement. And we hadn't seen each other for many, many years. But what I didn't know was that she had followed my career. And she's very, very clever. And somehow or other, she got me in. I was looking forward to putting my feet up and not doing anything else. And Judith got me involved. And that was getting on for 20 years ago. And I've been involved ever since. But it is a passion. I had helped to set up refuges. I was very interested in the Women's Aid movement and had experience. And of course, Judith wanted to take advantage of that. So at first I just advised and wasn't really on the board, but before I knew it I was a board member and eventually became chair. When I first got involved, as I said, I wasn't on the board, but I did attend some board meetings. I was invited to attend board meetings. And there were the most wonderful women who were involved, but hardly any of them were professional. They were volunteering, and the whole organisation was really dependent on their work. There was one administrator. We were in one room in the building that we now occupy, but we only had one room on the ground floor, and everything happened in that room. And there was one administrator who worked for 18 hours a week, and apart from that, everything else was done by the board and the volunteers. So if we were doing a newsletter, the compilation of the newsletter would be done in that room, and there were phone calls going on in one corner, there were women meeting about outreach work in another corner, and it really did need to somehow or other be controlled. It really needed to be professionalised. There were women going in and volunteers going in and out of the refuge. Everyone knew who was staying in the refuge, and they would talk about it in the kindest possible way, but confidentiality, although it was within this room, nevertheless, within all the people who were coming in and out of the room, there wasn't that level of confidentiality. The practices and procedures, the employment, all of those aspects really needed to, they needed to be overhauled. And we started a procedures manual. We had a rota of people who were, obviously there were people on the rota who were on the helpline, but we had a rota of people who were going out to shuls and other groups who were talking and letting people know about domestic abuse and violence in the Jewish community, which at that time hardly anyone believed existed. And that was an uphill struggle. But it was an uplifting atmosphere and environment to be working in, and to be working with all these people who were so committed.
Let me tell you something a little bit about Stephanie.
So now I'd like to tell you just a bit about Stephanie Barnett, who was the chair after Tanya Novick. And Stephanie and Tanya worked extremely well together. And Stephanie was the most committed person. She really cared passionately about JWA. And it was very sad that unfortunately she became chair, and I was vice chair at that time. And within about a year, or less than a year, she had to relinquish the position because she became extremely ill, and in fact died about 18 months after she became chair. So she was dreadfully, dreadfully missed and very difficult to replace.
And that's how you became
Yes,
chair.
yeah.
So, what would you, if you had to pinpoint, what would you say was your greatest challenge or your greatest moment?
I think the greatest challenge was always trying to get the message out to the Jewish community. It was very, very hard for most people to believe that there was domestic abuse amongst our community, because we always feel that this doesn't happen to us, that there are other people who are affected in this way, but it doesn't happen to us. And it was hard to get the message across, not just to ordinary people, but even to the Rabbonim, because they didn't want to believe it. And they preferred to look away. If they knew of cases, they could think of reasons why it wasn't so bad, and they were very frightened that we were going to break up marriages, and we didn't want to be seen in that light either. But we continued to try to get the message across that it does happen, and we are here not to break up marriages, but to help. I think probably the best thing that I can remember happening is linked to the challenge of trying to get the message across, because I can remember when Jane Lever and I were invited to address a conference of the United Synagogue Rabbis in Bournemouth, and we travelled along, and she talked about the refuge and I talked about the incidents of domestic abuse in the Jewish community. And when we'd finished, we were very, very well received. And then there was a queue of rabbis waiting to speak to us, to talk to us about cases in their synagogues and amongst their own communities, and to get our advice and to talk about making referrals. And that felt like a real breakthrough.